Good morning. My name is Martez Reed, and this session is covering getting started with VMware Dispatch. A little bit about myself. I am a cloud services engineer with Ahead, a consulting company based out of Chicago, Illinois. There are various ways that you can reach out to me, contact me via LinkedIn, Twitter, or GitHub, or any number of other methods to be reached. So we'll jump right in to sort of what is fast or serverless as a sort of overcap of VMware Dispatch. So essentially, when you really boil it down, serverless is essentially on-demand ephemeral containers. Some people think there's a lot of magic that goes into it of, well, we don't need any more ops people because serverless is going to take over everything, which really isn't true. But in the sense of on-demand ephemeral containers, really all that means is that when a request for a particular function comes into the server, or servers in most cases, then a container specific to that function is provisioned or spun up in response to that trigger, which is the API call in most cases. And so what it does is it spins it up, services that request, and then tears it down at some given period of time following that request. So this avoids the need for long-running servers to constantly be around and reduces overhead in terms of administration. So as a part of ramping up to VMware Dispatch, one of the key things to know about is Docker. And now some of the things that are confusing for people with Docker and Kubernetes is, well, is Kubernetes going to kill off Docker? Well, Docker in its truest sense is just simply the container engine that products like a Docker or maybe a Mesos or a DCOS leverage underneath to actually handle the creation and running of the containers. So it's not a either or, it's in conjunction with. So now we get to VMware Dispatch. So VMware Dispatch is an open source project, and what it aims to do is provide sort of an enterprise-grade serverless solution or OpenFast or fast solution. It's relatively new. The first commit that I was able to find on GitHub was from December 11th of last year, so less than 7 months, give or take, of the open source project being out. So it's still in sort of its infancy and incubation stage. So kind of low-level details. One of the things is the solution is a microservices architecture. So what this means is that VMware Dispatch runs on top of Kubernetes. So there are multiple containers that are leveraged as part of the overall solution. One of the things that this does is simplifies things like upgrades or changing out versions because you're only worried about a specific component of the solution as opposed to completely overhauling the solution. So this slide covers sort of at a high level, the VMware Dispatch architecture. As we can see, all of these sort of disparate pieces are formed together, and so a lot of these are the different microservices within the VMware Dispatch solution. Things like the REST API, the API gateway, image manager, event manager, different things like that. And so what all these are able to do is come together to form a higher level solution, much like we see in services provided by AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, to where they're leveraging open source tools and open source products and sort of molding them together into sort of this homogeneous solution to where it's not the end user just trying to bolt and strap all these really hard things to install together and really just getting the benefit of that work. So since it runs on Kubernetes, one of the things Kubernetes is really good at, obviously, is acting as a container orchestration engine where it's leveraging Docker as the actual container engine. And so what this means is Kubernetes handles where pods go or where containers go within the cluster of multiple either physical servers or virtual servers that are running Kubernetes. One of the things that this really bodes well for VMware Dispatch is allows it to scale really well, because I mean we've seen how well Kubernetes can scale its containers and its pods. So with VMware Dispatch riding on top of that, the possibility for scalability is really good. And the other key aspect becomes, essentially this is the de facto standard for container orchestration. And so with the dispatch team choosing to go with Kubernetes, it bodes well for adoption as well as the continual use of it. So as Kubernetes is growing like wildfire, you could see multiple use cases to where VMware Dispatch is simply just dropped into an existing installation of Kubernetes. You're not trying to bring in some brand new product and just completely create a brand new solution. Really what this allows you to do is leverage the existing investment in a Kubernetes environment and just simply deploy it like you would any other application within Kubernetes. So kind of the low-level pieces, it's leveraging Helm for the installation piece of VMware Dispatch. Helm is a very popular Kubernetes package manager that looks to simplify very complex applications, which is to a degree what VMware Dispatch is, to where you're talking 8 to 10 different containers or pods that are all coming together to form this homogeneous solution of collection of databases and application servers. Now we get into some of the actual functionality of VMware Dispatch. What it actually is fronted by in terms of the request within the cluster is fronted by Kong API Gateway, which is an open source project which is based upon Nginx. The value this brings is it offers complex routing in terms of request within the solution. So if a request comes into a particular port or a particular content, then it knows where to route it within the cluster. And it also uses Cassandra or Postgres for its configuration storage. So Kong API is an open source project outside of VMware Dispatch, but it's leveraged as part of the solution. So we can start to see more and more of these disparate open source solutions or products being brought together within VMware Dispatch, which is a really good thing because these products live in and of themselves, and the development cycles could be much faster outside of one central organization. The other piece that actually does the sort of the real work, I guess you could say, is OpenFast, or this VMware Dispatch also supports RIF, but OpenFast is one of the more popular ones. But essentially what this is a function as a service. So it's the notion of there's a particular function or action I want done, and OpenFast spins up that container to perform that action, and then in essence spins it down. It's got support for Docker Swarm as well as Kubernetes, so it fits right into the puzzle pieces of VMware Dispatch. And then one of the other big things it supports is identity management. So these are some of the key pieces, as we can see, of VMware Dispatch, to where it tries to bolt together a lot of different products and components to provide an enterprise-grade serverless solution. As opposed to some of these disparate pieces that we see, well, it does functions really well, or it does API gateway really well, but that's not something I can go and sell to an enterprise customer and say, hey, you need to move your serverless functions to this solution. Then they'll come and ask, well, where's the RBAC? Where's the identity management? Where's the auditing? All these sort of outlier pieces of a functional solution that are really important for enterprise companies. And sort of one of the really interesting things of the VMware Dispatch to me is the event driver. Essentially what this does is very similar to AWS events, to where based upon an event that happens within the environment, I can take an action. So in the case of right now, they currently support vSphere as well as AWS events. So in the case of vSphere, if a particular event or action is taken within the vSphere environment, I can run a function based upon that event. So this is actually really interesting from a security standpoint, to where you can XYZ action happens, or let's say somebody creates a brand new template, and then I can take an action or to run a function based upon that event happening within the vSphere environment to maybe run a scan against it, or maybe whoever ran it, whoever created it really wasn't authorized to create that, maybe at a particular period of time, so I go back and automatically delete it. The real benefit of this I see is its extensibility to where not just the currently supported vSphere and AWS events, I can bolt on maybe an Azure or maybe a custom event that is specific to my environment that I can have VMware Dispatch, in essence, ingest to where I'm taking action based upon that. Maybe it's an IoT device that is sending data, and I'm responding to those events and doing something of maybe an ETL on some piece of data that it's sending. So two of the installation methods that are out there. One is there's a downloadable OVA that can be pulled from the GitHub page provided by the VMware Dispatch team that allows you to get going pretty quickly to where it contains everything in terms of the installation to where it's almost, I think, like 2 or 3 commands, and then it gets you going with VMware Dispatch. It's a single node, so it's really efficient in terms of space to allow you to actually leverage that without having to stand up a full-blown Kubernetes cluster, which can be painful in and of itself. But if you do decide you want to do that, there's a sort of a DIY by, I believe it's Cody Diarklin, who posted it out there for kind of get you going with Kubernetes on a single node and then stand up everything for VMware Dispatch. A little more involved, but it's really fun to tinker and get into the weeds of what the solution can do. And so just some examples of the VMware Dispatch CLI. I believe it's actually written in Golang, so it pretty common language used now for server applications of the Terraforms, the Vaults, things from HashiCorp. And then just an example of triggering it from the CLI to run a particular function. It can also be, of course, triggered via a curl command or external API call to run a particular function. And some of the things that on their GitHub page that they're working on, which I think are pretty key to the viability of the solution, is function chaining, which is essentially, okay, I hit the API, I want to run a function, but this allows me to then run a sort of a chain of functions, as it insinuates, one after the other to create a more granular workflow in terms of the actions being taken. The other thing that's being worked on is component scaling, which is scaling of the infrastructure components of VMware Dispatch to ensure that it can scale up with the environment and to meet the needs of however many functions you need to call. The other big thing is multi-tenant support, which will enable it to, of course, support multiple authentication methods to where it could potentially be used by a service provider or within an organization that has multiple different authentication methods that they want to leverage. And of course, as part of the authentication piece, you then want to leverage RBAC to handle the authorization of once user X is authenticated, what can and can't he do or she do. All right, any questions? Thank you.